All right, it's that time of week again. This is the second to last edition of the A Different Kind of Power Rankings. Without further ado, let's just get into it. So, all right, bottom four, and just so you know what you're looking at, basically you look at the top part because there's two sections. There's the top section and the bottom section. In the top section, what you're going to notice is basically for each of those numbers, like for example, the Jets offensive line on the top left-hand corner, that's 1.14. That's how many wins were earned from the offensive line projected over 17 games. This has just been through 16, obviously, but that's where they're at there. Also, if you want to look at the key on the bottom, that's how many wins you can earn for which tier you end up in. So the Jets offensive line being 1.14, that's a tier 3 offensive line. We don't have to spend forever on this, just maybe a couple of notable things. I think maybe the biggest notable thing is, hey, Jets, how about that tier 4 quarterback play? Moving up in the world a little bit. Zach Wilson started to play well enough to get him up to tier 4. Part of that too actually is Mike White and Josh Johnson have helped with that. But still, you're moving in the right direction there. Only other really good thing about any of these teams is the Giants coverage, which is tier 3. Other than that, maybe some kicking as well, but not a lot going on well with these bottom four. We don't have to spend forever on it because, who really cares about the Giants at this point in the season unless you're a Giants fan. Next four, maybe a couple of interesting things here. So the Detroit Lions at 28, there's some intrigue with, again, quarterback's been tier 4 all season. That checks out. Jared Goff is like the definition of a tier 4 quarterback. Love like he has some value, just not a lot. Wide receiving core, hey, that's been a little bit better as well. Tier 4. It's not a complete mess. You have some things to work with there. And offensive line's been solid. Just nothing else has really other than kicking. Again, 27, not a lot going on offense with the Carolina Panthers. Solid defense, though. Kind of same story we've done every week. 26, though, the Steelers, this is an interesting team. So they're currently sitting at 8.5 actual wins, but their total projected wins over 17 is just 5.33. They've massively overperformed. And what's the reason for that? I have typically blamed good coaching, I think is the real reason. Maybe, I think some people would argue I don't value pass rush high enough, but I don't know if that's true. I think that because really the Steelers are the only team like this. The Steelers are the only team that overperforms and they have a great tier 1 pass rush and consistently overperforms. So I think it's more of a Mike Tomlin thing than, or maybe you could argue their pass rush is so much better, it deserves more value than just the average tier 1 pass rush. There's an argument there. For the balls here, that's the Washington football team, of course. Again, really good offensive line. Their pass rush had been tier 1 at points this season. It's dropped all the way to tier 3 at this point. That's just been from injuries. Taylor Heineke, tier 4. So again, there's stuff here, just not a ton of value here. Next, for the Atlanta Falcons, they've shown that, listen, you can win some games with a solid quarterback and solid receiving core and solid offensive line, even if the rest of your team isn't very good. Good kicking as well, though. That matters. So 7 actual wins. They're projected for 6.43, so that's right around where their projection should say. They haven't really been lucky or unlucky, kind of right where they should be. The Saints only one spot ahead of them. So in a crucial game to see who potentially, if the Saints will get into the playoffs, according to this algorithm, they're relatively equal in terms of how they played over the course of a 17-game season. And part of you wonders as well, where would the Saints actually be if it wasn't for all these, injuries, or really for all the players that, are no longer on the team, but, did add value to them. For example, they get credit for tier 4 quarterback play, but if it was just Taysom Hill all season, would it really be tier 4? I don't know. One thing I do know is that their run defense and coverage is very good, and you can win a lot of games doing that, which is why I do think they will beat the beat the Falcons and probably get into the playoffs unless San Francisco wins. The Seahawks and the Dolphins are the next two teams, and again, don't often see Tua and Russell Wilson put on the same tier, but according to this, they have been. Part of it has been, listen, Russell Wilson's been hurt, right? So that's been a big chunk of it. And Tua's played solid this year as well. Tua being tier 3, that checks out. I think people got way too hard on him when they lost some games early on, and people got way too excited about him when they won some games later. No, he's a solid quarterback who you hope can grow and get better. Receiving core also solid, but again, that's kind of weird because the receiving core has gotten much better over the year. So that's promising heading into next year. And their defense was good, but just, it's hard to win too many games if you have some zeros there. 0 in kicking, 0 in offensive line, 0 in the running game. and that's gonna hurt you a little. And for Seattle, it's kind of the opposite problem. They just didn't have a lot they could be great at. They had some stuff they were solid at, and also underperformed a little bit of their win total. Part of me wonders how much of that is coaching. All right, next 4. How about the Chicago Bears? They're a solid team. Like, the Bears aren't a terrible team. They're not one of the worst teams in football. They're not great, right? Like, but that's kind of where they feel like they're at. They're like a solidly below average team. They feel like, you think about a below average team, Chicago is that team. Tier 4 quarterback play. It's not all Justin Fields, but some of it is. I believe he'd be right around there if he had taken every snap. So that's cool to see. Offensive line's been solid. You get some value with the running game and the wide receiver play, and a little bit of value in defense, not a ton. So that's where the Bears are at. The Denver Broncos now. So again, similar to the Bears, like, they get tier 3 quarterback play because they've had, kind of consistently like solid quarterback play, but nothing spectacular. Most of that was with Teddy Bridgewater, of course. Wide receiver play had been tier 1 at one point, but has fallen to tier 3, and that probably does check out from what I've seen. And I think the biggest disappointment from Denver is their coverage was supposed to be better. It was supposed to be tier 1, been tier 3, that's not good enough. Number 18, the Raiders, who continue to be one of the more top-heavy teams of, like, what they do well is the receiving game and quarterback, and you can win a lot of games that way. Currently, they've won 9, basically with just that. Now, they have no offensive line help. Their coverage is mediocre at best. Good kicking as well. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said coverage is mediocre at best. It's mediocre. Like, it's solid. It's good. Maybe even a little better than mediocre. Really, their corners are good. It's sort of the over-the-middle stuff they've struggled with. So, that's where the Raiders are at. They've won 9 games. They're projected for 8.74 over 17. So, if they lose, they're kind of right at my projections. But if they win, they could overperform and they would get into the playoffs, which would be cool. 17, the Raiders. They're just a weird team. Like, all these grades, like, I don't know what to make of a lot of them because, again, it doesn't matter. If you get injured, then whoever replaces them, it's their grades, not a count. They're all weighted the same. So because of that, like, okay, quarterback play, like, it's not tier 3 quarterback with Lamar in there, but it's also not tier 3 quarterback play with Josh Johnson in there. So which one is it? Kind of, reverts to the middle. So that's where the Ravens are at. Next, 4 here. So the Chiefs are at 16, which is, again, it's a lot lower than a lot of people would have them. They've won 11 games, and their total in terms of projected wins over 17 is at 9.19. So, again, there's a lot to like. The offensive line. Quarterback play has only been tier 3, which we all know Mahomes is better than a tier 3 quarterback. So I think it's fair to say that that's maybe how he's played this season. But as a whole, I would have Mahomes a lot higher than tier 3. I would still have him at tier 2 even for this season, which hasn't been great. Maybe at tier 1 for this season, even though he hasn't been great. That's just my opinion, which is okay. We can disagree with these grades from time to time. Solid wide receiving play, but again, it's been inconsistent, but really good when it's been on. And I would say the same thing of coverage. It's been a bit inconsistent, but especially against the Bengals. I mean, I believe their coverage unit was tier 1 heading into that week, dropped to tier 2 because of that game as a whole. Maybe double team the opposing team's superstar wide receiver next time. Number 15, the Cardinals, another team that's lower than people would expect. I mean, they're currently here. It's a lot of Kyler Murray. That's what they're at. And good wide receiving play. Not a lot else holding this team together. But you know what? That can win you some games. That's still pretty good. So, I think that, again, I don't know which grades I would totally disagree with. Maybe you could argue some should be a little higher. But again, according to how this season has played out, I think that's relatively fair. Number 14, the Philadelphia Eagles. And again, 14 and 13, people are going to say, like, there's no way the Eagles and Vikings should be higher than the Cardinals and Chiefs. Well, the one thing I'll say about the Eagles is they're a team that people have consistently wrote angry comments in the comment section below saying the Eagles should be, nowhere near as high as they actually are. And even I've been like, okay, Eagles have been given, way too much credit here. But then they've consistently, performed. And if they're going to make the playoffs, or they've already clinched it. So, yeah, I get it. But listen, there's enough stuff they do well that they're still going to get into the postseason. And according to this algorithm, they've actually, if anything, underperformed a little bit. Number 13, the Vikings, they've way underperformed. Horrible coaching there. And again, is Kirk Cousins truly a tier 1 quarterback? Probably not. So that's also another aspect to that. Next, 4 here, another team that's massively underperformed, the Cleveland Browns, where, again, part of this might be like, okay, do you consider that the running game is actually tier 1? And I was wondering this, and I kind of thought about this as well. is if your passing game hasn't been great, only 1.82 wins with the quarterback and wide receiver play, does that actually hurt the expected value you typically get from a tier 1 running back? Because a big part of what a tier 1 running back does is it's less about what they actually do in the running game and kind of more about what they do to set stuff up. But when you're not taking advantage of that, you might actually lose some value. So that's kind of maybe an area where the algorithm, that's something the algorithm can't account for, which is, again, not a reason to throw it out. There's no such thing as a perfect stat in football, but just something that I didn't think about before that's worth noting. Browns defense has been very good. It's really a shame this team could not make the playoffs because they have so much talent, but you need to get better receivers, which the Odell Beckham thing didn't work out. And really, quite frankly, you need better quarterback play. And whether that's Baker Mayfield getting better next year or whoever you bring in being better than him. Tier 4 quarterback play, not good enough. Number 11, this is the surprise, but I keep pointing this out to people. Derrick Henry will be back. You're getting 2 extra wins here. So if you get those 2 extra wins, it feels way better. They would then be a top 5 team in football according to the algorithm. So that alone changes things. Other than that, I kind of think this is fair. Like everything I see on here, really good coverage unit. Tannehill is a tier 2 quarterback. He's a perfect example of who a tier 2 quarterback is. And then everything else, this all kind of checks out to me. And even you see total expected for 10.63 wins. They'll probably end up with 12, so a little bit above average, but around that, like really anything like 2 or more than 2 or less than 2, that's around where the luck will get you. 2 games more or less tends to be it. Meanwhile, for the Indianapolis Colts, who will probably end up with 10 wins, assuming they beat Jacksonville, they're a big Jonathan Taylor team, and them, unlike Cleveland, has at least had enough talent in that quarterback and receiving room to take advantage of what Jonathan Taylor can set up for them. Good defense on top of it, at least like solid defense on top of it. So they're here at number 10. The Chargers at number 9, who people, it's similar because them and the Raiders are really similar teams actually. And people like to say, yeah, Chargers, look at their defense has really struggled a lot. How good is this defense? I don't know. They could need a third option, all this stuff. At the end of the day, you still have Justin Herbert that can win you some games. Being top heavy is better than sucking, right? Like it's better than not being good at anything. Being great at something is better than maybe being okay at everything. All right, so 8 through 5, San Francisco shot up a little bit here. So it would be such a shame if this San Francisco 49ers team did not make the postseason. I have them as a top 8 team according to this algorithm. So them missing the playoffs would just be a bummer. Like they're a top 7 team in the NFC. They are, to me. Playing a tough division, that's a part of it. A great offensive line, just fantastic stuff. Tier 3 quarterback play, that checks out. Tier 1 wide receiving play, that checks out. And their defense has been pretty good on top of it. So, and I think they actually probably get some extra value from the running game, even if it's not actually the name brand, just because the Shanahan scheme sets things up for them. So they're projected for 11.39 wins. They're going to be below that projection, but hey, you win one more game, you're in. So all you have to do is beat the Rams or for the Saints to lose, which can very much happen. Number 7, the Dallas Cowboys, who are a very good team. Tier 1 offensive line, Tier 2 quarterback play, Tier 1 wide receiving room. That's going to win you a lot of football games in the NFL, and it has won them a lot of football games in the NFL, especially with a coverage unit that's ended up being Tier 2 this year. This now puts them, at 11 wins and 11.88 wins projected. If they win the final game of the season, they're basically right at their projection. Number 6, the Cincinnati Bengals. They're a big, again, another one of those teams where it's like, okay, it's mostly their wide receiving core in Joe Burrow, but that's not a bad place to be, especially when their coverage unit has played as well as it has. Again, it's had some bad moments, but really, I feel like I've been probably too low on it over the course of the season, looking back, just because of, again, they got lit up by Mike White. I just can't get that out of my brain. It's unfortunate for them. Can't get that out of my brain, but they're a team that, they're another one of those teams where I kept saying, okay, Cincinnati shouldn't be that high. Well, maybe they should. Maybe I was underrating them because they've, at this point, them being at 6 almost feels like it's like, if anything, maybe that's a bit too low, I think some people would say. Whereas in the past, they were getting out number 6 and people were saying, what are you doing? They should be at 15. So they're another team that's surprised. The algorithm has ended up being right on. Number 5, the Buffalo Bills here, which, again, every week I say this, quarterback play should not be Tier 3, running games should not be Tier 1. Flip those around, value is about the same. It's just in different places. So I keep saying that. Don't really get that. The wide receiving room has gotten a lot better as of late, though, and that's worth noting because that was a real issue early on. So that being tier 2 is huge for Buffalo. Tier 1 coverage, even without Tre'Davious White, how well they've covered, that's just absurd how well they've done. So again, I still feel like I would like to have Tre'Davious White, but it's pretty impressive that they've been covering still so as well without a superstar corner. They have only won 10 games, but they've underperformed, and I think we agree with that. Like, they've lost some games they shouldn't have, and they're a much better team than that. Finally, top 4. I mean, it's been kind of the usual suspects here at the top for a bit now. I mean, the Rams at number 4 with their, tier 1 offensive line, tier 2 quarterback play, tier 2 wide receiving play, and then good defense. They're sitting here at 12.5 projected wins, and they've won 12 games. So they're basically right at their projections with 1 game left. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a little bit below their projections, but just a little bit. Tier 1 quarterback play, tier 2 wide receiver play, tier 2 offensive line play, and then the tier 1 coverage. The pass rush has been disappointing this season. There's no denying that. Even the run defense has been disappointing this season, but they're still a very good team. And sitting here at number 3, they're currently, according to the algorithm, the biggest threat to the Green Bay Packers in the NFC. Green Bay here with solid offensive line, good quarterback play at tier 2. That's what PFF has them at. I'd probably put that at tier 1. I think that's a little silly, but again, I get the logic behind it. The reality is, Aaron Rodgers has certainly been a tier 1 quarterback the last half of the season. So the argument is kind of, okay, throughout the course of the season, has he been tier 1? Probably not, but over the course of, or at least I would still say yes, but they say no. However, the past 8 games, he's a tier 1 quarterback. So in the playoffs, he'll have the value of a tier 1 quarterback. Tier 1 receiving room, a lot of that is Devontae Adams. Tier 1 running game with A.J. Dillon being incredible. And then really good coverage on top of this. And they get Jair Alexander back. And tier 1 pass rush. I mean, there's a lot of talent on this Green Bay team. They've won 13 games. They're projected for just shy of 14. Who knows if they'll get there if they play their starters against Detroit. We'll have to see. Number 1, the New England Patriots continue to be number 1 on this list. They just have so much talent. Tier 2 offensive line, tier 2 quarterback, tier 1 wide receiving room, tier 2 running game, tier 2 run defense, tier 1 coverage. I mean, a tier 1 kicker. Their pass rush is only tier 3. Like, that's the bad part about this team. I mean, they're just such a complete team. The only argument I could really get against New England is you could argue some of these stats get inflated simply because they beat up on bad teams, but that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to beat up on bad teams. You could say that the same thing about Buffalo, who plays in their same division, plays their same schedule, save for a couple of games. So to me, I think that like the New England Patriots are a really good team. Will they go to the Super Bowl? I don't know, but they're a very good team, and I think that there's logic for this. Again, do some of these grades change once you get to the playoffs? I don't know. Does the running game become more important, less important in the playoffs? I haven't seen any data to suggest anyway, but it's fascinating. Only 1 week left of these until we get where the final rankings will be, although I believe they even update during the playoffs, but regardless, this is what I think. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'm sure you will, because power rankings always bring out the arguments, which is fun. But yeah, let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.